Hello, I'm Sophia Smith-Gaylor, and this is the programme that explores the world we live in through the work and the voices of artists. Welcome to the Cultural Frontline. This week, we meet the artists drawing new worlds through animation. Coming up, animator Cycil Jones-Abban tells us about the future of animation in Ghana.
We've noticed that people are really yearning for African content. They're really yearning to see animation that speaks to their culture, that speaks to their language, that speaks to their problems. And this is what we want to get out there.
Can animation be a tool for activism? Veronica Shima on why students created a short film protesting Poland's new abortion ban.
Because they saw this animation and it made them think more like in a symbolic way. Maybe not only seeing protests and politicians, but real people's feelings and opinions.
Those stories and more all coming up on this week's Cultural Frontline, so stay with us. From Disney to Studio Ghibli, American and Japanese animation is famous across the world. But how are other countries telling their own stories through animation? The industry is growing in India and Ghana, allowing for new styles and perspectives to reach a global audience. Sharad Devarajan is the showrunner and writer of the Indian animated TV series The Legend of Hanuman. It draws on the stories of the great Hindu epic, the Ramayana. The animation style is inspired by influences as diverse as the Kerala cave paintings and Indian comic books. Cycil Jones-Abban is the director of Ghanaian animated film 28th, The Crossroads. The film shines a spotlight on the forgotten Ghanaian contribution to World War II. They join us to discuss the trends and challenges inspiring their work.
You know, Ghana is a country blessed with a rich source of stories. Back in the days, every evening in our communities greeted a time of storytelling by the fireside, where our elderly folks would tell us Anansi stories and other folkloric stories in a way to pass on legacy, pass on the cultural values and norms of a society, to help the children behave in a particular way in society. So having experienced some of these stories, and fast forward, with the coming of television, we got exposed to Cartoon Network and their Captain Planet and Marvel's animated series. So we realized that we're beginning to lose touch with these storytelling by the fireside. And then I felt that we needed to keep up the tradition. So my motivation was to package all of these traditional folkloric stories and present them in an animation form to a generation that is now interested in cartoons.
And Sharad, India obviously also has a really rich tradition of storytelling. Was there a similar motivation behind you setting up your studio?
I had started my journey helping to bring a lot of Western content out to markets like India and Southeast Asia, and worked during that time on the reinvention of Spider-Man from Peter Parker to Pavitra Prabhakar, the Indian Spider-Man, bouncing off rickshaws, living in Mumbai, celebrating Diwali. So, it's been this kind of journey where I've always seen what, the West has done with really creating a pop culture ecosystem that has been very unique and distinct and spoken to audiences globally. But on the flip side, I've grown up with some of the deep mythic stories of India. And, this defining mission that we have been on is how do we create new characters and stories that are uniquely Indian, but can speak to audiences from, Boston to Beijing to Bangalore, but with a new voice, with the kind of creativity, worldview, and uniqueness of the Indian ethos. And, having spent so much time bringing some of the West to the East, I woke up one day and I saw so much of the East going to the West, whether it was, countries like Korea, China, Japan, characters like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Becoming household names around the world. And the country with the largest youth population in the world, India, with over 600 million people under the age of 25, had really not taken a step in this global way of taking content in this animation and pop culture kind of narrative to the world. So we went around the country recruiting artists, writers, painters, pulling them to our studio with one defining mission: to transform the perception of India from being, this outsourcer to being the source, to creating these new stories and characters. And that has been sort of, one of the most defining missions of my life, to bridge East and West.
And in trying to make a distinctive Indian pop culture, do you have to make the animation distinctive as well? And how do you do that?
For India, color is such a vibrant part of who we are. And similarly, while we've been influenced by a lot of Western content, there is so much of temple painting, art, historic content that we have, and stories and sculpture. And so a lot of the animation styles that we've been experimenting with are, how do we unlock something very distinctly Indian? In this new show that we've done, integration of Kerala painting art style. It looks back into calendar art, which was a very vibrant form of colors and softness that was used. So, so a lot of this is stuff that has been part of the Indian ethos forever, but how do we take it into this modern language of animation and graphic novels and then present it to the world as something that hopefully feels, unique and distinct?
And Cycil, what is it that defines a Ghanaian visual identity in your animations?
We try as much as possible to make sure that there's a cultural reflection in all our animated movies. For instance, in designing our characters, we do a sample of all the traditional wears that come from different parts of the country and ethnic representation. And so based on the character personality, we decide, okay, this particular dress from the north will suit this character. And then when we are done, we add some modernized twist to it because we know everything has to become trendy and stylish. So we add a modern twist to it. So it's a traditional wear, but in a modern form.
You made the film 28th The Crossroads, which is all about the story of Ghanaian World War II veterans. What was it that made you want to tell their story in animated form?
We noticed that a lot of the younger generation are missing out on our history. If you ask a young person about Sir Gettysburg, Abraham Lincoln, they are very familiar. But if you tend to ask them who is Sergeant Ajete, who is Yaa Asantewaa, they tend to falter. And we want to teach them some of these historical facts that happen and present them in animation because animation is a trend now. They love animation. So that is what motivated us to pick on the 28th. 28th because it's a very important event that happened in the history of this country. A group of dissatisfied ex-servicemen were marching to the seat of government, which is the British colonial power, to present their petition. And unfortunately, they were met at the Christianborg Castle, and there was a shootout. That shootout resulted in 3 people dying instantly. Now, that particular shooting got the nation very angry. And based on that, the political leaders started demanding self-governance. Eventually, we won the self-governance. And then at the end of the day, Ghana became independent from British colonial rule. The story itself also is important for us because we've realized that there's a lot of narrative about the African. Everything is quite painted dark, impoverished, and wars and stuff. But we want to change that narrative. And we believe that we need to tell our own stories.
Same for you, Sharad. When it comes to Hanuman, what made you want to tell the story?
Hanuman in particular, he's one of these most profound characters that has represented loyalty, strength, bravery, wisdom to over 1.5 billion people around the world. He's one of the defining characters that really speaks to our worldview and spiritual traditions.
What trends do you see as emerging in this field?
There's this trend of animation where people use cartoons and animation to talk about social issues. And then also quite a number of them doing short skits and funny stuff. But we are looking at a bigger picture where we want to create a vibrant industry. And we believe that it's not just these short skits that will help us to build a vibrant industry. We need to produce more. We've noticed that people are really yearning for African content. They're really yearning to see animation that speaks to their culture, that speaks to their language, that speaks to their problems. And this is what we want to get out there.
And what about in India?
I'd echo what Cycil is saying, because for us, we're trying to find what is the story of our lifetime? What is the story that really defines India? And, if you look at the West, the great superheroes really dealt with this theme of humanity versus science. So it was the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Spider-Man, everyone got their powers from radiation or technology. And if you looked at the Japanese anime and manga, it was really about the imbalance humanity felt as a result of the industrial age. So you had angry forest spirits, toxic monsters like Godzilla, post-apocalyptic wastelands. In India, I think there's a different reconciliation that's happening and a different type of story, which is this search for spirituality in the modern context, reconciling these ancient stories and these wisdom traditions that have guided so much of our thinking. So, there's this great storytelling we have where we also look at the worlds of good and evil in a different lens than, let's say, the Judeo-Christian archetypes that have been there. And I think that some of that deeper spiritual truths can be explored in animation in so many profound ways. So when we move away from, let's say, traditional kids animation into exploring the medium of animation, we will be able to do things visually that will captivate people in very profound ways for India and the world.
Sharad Devarajan and Cycil Jones Abban. That's it for this week's programme. Remember, you can get in touch on social media using the hashtag BBC Cultural Frontline. We'll be here same time next week with more stories of artists changing the world and the way we see it. Until then, goodbye.